heard the phrase burnout, but I don't know if you know what it means or not. Burnout is an emotional disorder that comes from carrying stress, too much stress for too long. That's what burnout is. And burnout is one of those things that, as the person I am with the personality that I have, burnout is one of those things when it's described to me, I'm like, that is this thing that happens to weak people, not to me, right? That's what I think. And it's absolutely not true. Because you are only capable of carrying so much for so long before you just give out. That's the way it works. Burnout is not just I'm tired. Okay, the way that you can recognize burnout is I sleep and wake up tired. No matter how much I sleep, I wake up tired. Burnout is I am the only one doing anything that matters, and everybody else has put the load on me. It's not true, but that's the way it feels. Burnout is I am irrationally angry, I am irrationally upset about everything. That's what burnout looks like. I'm not a clinician, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor, not any of those things. So understand that's who I am. But I've dealt with this enough that I am concerned for you and want to show you in the Bible what burnout looks like, how God treats it, and to help you be able to recognize it in yourself. And when we look for, is burnout in the Bible, or is this just a life coach kind of pastor kind of thing? There is a very clear example of somebody experiencing burnout and God responding to it in the story of Elijah. The whole reason I'm preaching through Elijah right now is because I wanted to get to the next 4 sermons. It's the whole reason I wanted to do this. And everything else was just prep work getting there. But burnout matters for you to understand because burnout is incredibly dangerous for us. And if we don't take it seriously, if we don't recognize it, then we suffer the consequences. 2% of pastors leave ministry every year. And they don't really leave ministry, they leave vocational ministry. They leave ministry as a job. 2% of them leave. And if it's not because of sin and it's not because of money, it's generally because of burnout. They just get so overloaded that they break and they leave. They can't do it anymore. Burnout leads to people getting angry and leaving the church. We've had people that were incredibly hard workers that carried a lot of roles in this church, carried a lot of work in this church, cared deeply about this church, and burnout led them to almost hate this church and to leave. People that you would have said, never is this going to happen. This happens. Burnout leads to divorce. Burnout leads to midlife crises. Burnout leads to affairs. Interestingly enough, if a man gets burnout, if he's dealing with burnout, he is more likely to respond with a midlife crisis or just leaving his family. But a woman in burnout generally responds with an affair. Because men and women have affairs for different reasons. Men are generally have affairs for opportunity or excitement. They're just bored. That's generally what it happens. Women have affairs because they're missing something or feel like they're missing something and they're looking for it somewhere else. So a woman in burnout is much more likely to have an affair than a man is. But a man is more likely to buy a sports car or to break down his job or just to leave the family, not to have an affair. Burnout is incredibly dangerous. And if we were talking about cancer, everybody immediately be like, yeah, we got to deal with this. We got to handle it right now because this is serious. But burnout is like pride. It's one of those things that you don't even notice as a problem. It's like gossip. You don't even realize how big of a deal it is, and you just let it go until you break. And then they say, where is that person? Well, they're gone. Why did they leave? They got really crazy mad about stuff for no reason and thought everybody was their enemy, and they left. And so I care about you. And because I care about you, I want you to understand this. And if you come to me and say, I feel like I'm burnt out, here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to remind you what I just said for the last few minutes, what I'm going to say in the next few minutes. I'm going to have a conversation with you, and then I'm going to recommend that you speak to somebody who's trained in helping you, rather than you just relying on me, who is not trained as just somebody who can recognize the symptoms. But I want you to see this, so that you can recognize it in yourself, you can recognize it in others, and you know what steps you need to take to prevent it from ever happening in the first place. So we're going through the story of Elijah. And Elijah is quickly becoming one of my favorite characters in the Bible the more that we go through this. He is the capital P prophet. He is the superhero of the Old Testament. He's the one that they tell legends and stories about. But if you stop going through the flannel graph version of Elijah and read what actually happened, you see that he is just a regular guy. This is what James told us, that he was just a regular guy, and God did amazing things through him because of his faith. But we also see in Elijah that he is dramatic, and he likes dramatics. He likes big productions. We see Elijah as he comes in and he's confronting Ahab for the first time. And Ahab is this powerful, evil king, and he shows up and he confronts Ahab, and God says it's not going to rain for a long time. Turns out it's going to be 3.5 years, and Elijah has to run away. God takes care of him. He ends up with a widow. God provides through Elijah for the widow. Then the widow's son dies, and Elijah prays to God, and he comes back to life. And he's super dramatic about how he does it. It's not just, hey, will you bring him back to life? He lays on him and screams 3 times, and God said, this is a lot, but yeah, I'll answer that prayer. And then Elijah is told by God, go back and tell them that the rain is over. And then whenever you get there and tell them the rain's over, it's going to start raining. But Elijah says, that's not enough. We can do better. We can do more. So he brings the entire nation over, at least the leaders of all the nation, over to Mount Carmel. He brings people in from outside the country that can watch it. He's got all these prophets that are there, and he challenges a showdown between the god Baal and our God, his God. He brings this down, and then the prophets of Baal lose, and he wins. God sends fire from heaven and shows that he's real, and then they kill all the prophets of Baal, which God did not tell him to do any of that, but he did that. God just said, show up and it's going to start raining. But he said, I want it to be more dramatic. I want it to be bigger. And where we're at right now is right after that. We talked last week about how Elijah goes from this huge climax of his ministry that should be the greatest thing ever, and he can't enjoy it, he can't rest in it because he's so stressed out about taking responsibility for the outcome that he is just in anxiety on his knees, on his feet, with his head between his knees, waiting for God to come through the thing that he promised would happen. And this is where we pick up immediately after that in 1 Kings chapter 19. 1 Kings 19, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. So Elijah has been protected by God. God's told him when to move a couple of times. God told him to run to the wilderness. God told him to go to Sidon, to go stay with the widow. God told him to do these things. But God didn't tell him to do this. Jezebel hears, you killed all my prophets. You killed all the false priests. I'm very angry about this. It's time for you to die too. And there's an argument to be made here, like what would have happened if Elijah had just done what God said? Would she have still wanted to kill him? It's possible. But if he had done this without just completely humiliating her and allow God to be the bad guy instead of him being the bad guy, would she have sworn to kill him? Would she have chased him out of the country? It's unlikely. I don't think it would have happened. Maybe it would have. We don't know. But what we do know is that Elijah has been taken care of by God for 3.5 years, and now he's afraid that that's not happening anymore. And he runs. He runs about 150 miles to Beersheba. He goes to the other nation of Israel. He goes south. And when he gets there, he leaves behind his servant to keep going. So in verse 4, he went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he asked that he might die, saying, it is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I'm no better than my fathers. And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. It's about a 7-day journey for him to get from where he was at Mount Carmel down to Beersheba. It's another day. It's been 8 days since the absolute highlight, pinnacle of his ministry. Best day that's ever happened to him. God came through in an amazing way. It's the story that we tell. It's the story that we tell kids. It's a story that will be told forever. And 8 days after the greatest thing that's ever happened to him, God coming through in the biggest way possible, he says, I want to die. Please just let me die. How does a man go from the highlight of his life to please let me die in a week? He does that when he's burnt out. He does that when he's carrying more responsibility than God ever asked him to carry. And it breaks him. Have you ever been there? That great things are happening in your life. God is moving. Things are happening. Everybody is healthy. And you're like, you know what? I would be okay if I died right now. I'm not going to do anything about it. But I wouldn't be upset. How does that happen? How does that happen that you can go from this huge apex of the movement of God to, can I just die? Can I please just die and be done? It's enough. I've had enough. Take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers. Just let me die. Burnout does this. It robs you of joy because you've got all this extra responsibility for the outcome of the world. You're carrying all this extra stress that's not yours to carry. And when you break, it doesn't matter what else is going on. It doesn't matter how great things are around you. It doesn't matter all the things that God's doing because you can't see it. You can't see it. You get tunnel vision with burnout. And all you can see is your pain. All you can see is your fear. All you can see is your stress. And it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. It doesn't matter what else is happening. All you can see is how much you're hurting. You say, God, if you would just do this, then I would be okay. And then God does that and you're still not okay. You say, God, if my husband or my wife would do this, I would be okay. If they would just do this, then I would be okay. And then they do that, and you're still not okay. In fact, you don't even acknowledge that they did it. Or you dismiss what they did. He says, I want to die, and I'm going to lay under this tree and die. The man of God can't see the work of God, because he has taken on so much responsibility that all he can see is his pain. In verse 6, well, this is finishing verse 5, actually. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. So he lays under the tree and he goes to sleep. God says, I'm not talking to you right now. Probably shouldn't have any conversations right now. So he sends an angel. And the angel says, I've made you some food. You need to wake up and eat. Nap and a snack. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water, and he ate and he drank and he lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came a second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he arose and ate and drank. The cool thing about this is that God's response to Elijah's burnout is not anger at his failure for not being enough. God never asked him to do most of the things that he did. God never put him in the position of holding up this entire ministry and standing before the entire nation and calling down. God never told him to do any of that. God said he was going to take care of it. Just go and show everybody where I'm at. Show that you're here, and then I'm going to send rain. But Elijah's like, no, we can do better. So he takes on more and more and more responsibility. But God doesn't get angry with him. In fact, throughout this entire story, there is no point that God is harsh with him. Because God knew he couldn't carry it in the first place. Right? If a kid decides they're going to carry out a bag full of hammers and they're 9 years old and they've just got a duffel bag full of hammers and you say, you're not going to be able to carry that. And he says, yes, I can. I have 3 kids, so I have experience with this. Carry that out, and what does the kid do? He picks it up and falls over. Does the parent get angry about that? No, you knew knew it wasn't going to work in the first place. But we assume the first thing that is going to happen is that God's going to be angry with us for breaking. God's going to be angry with us for not being able to carry the load. God is not only not angry, He's not surprised. Because He never gave you that load in the first place. In fact, He said what He was going to do and asked you to handle what you were going to do. I saw this thing today. Earlier this week, and it fits really well what we're talking about. And this pastor went through and he said, we talk about control a lot, but the only control God ever asked you to take was self-control. To be in charge of yourself and what you do and how you respond. And we think we're controlling the universe. We got to control our kids' fates. We got to control our marriage. We got to control all these things. But what God has actually asked us to do is just to control ourselves and to obey and allow Him to handle the outcomes. So Elijah says, please just let me die. And then he goes to sleep under a tree. And the angel comes and fixes him food and wakes him up, feeds him, lets him go back to sleep, feeds him again. And then now that Elijah's feeling a little bit better, Elijah begins his next dramatic escapade. It's like espresso. Sometimes you don't know what to say. Halfway through verse 8, this is what it says. And he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the Mount of God. Now, maybe you don't know what Mount Horeb is, but you know where this mountain is. Okay? This is Mount Sinai. This is the mountain where most likely Moses saw the burning bush. This is the mountain where Moses definitely went up and got the Ten Commandments, where there was fire on the mountain and the nation of Israel gathered around it. This is nowhere near where he's supposed to be. He is the prophet to the kingdom of Israel, and he is 2 countries away. He's much closer to Egypt than he is to where he's supposed to be, in the desert mountain. And the reason he goes there is because he loves drama. God did not tell him to do this. He said, I'm going to say something to God. I'm going to speak to God. I got things to say to God about what He's let happen to me. And so I'm going to God's house. I'm going to God's mountain. I'm going to Mount Sinai. This is a 400-mile journey from where he left at Mount Carmel to where he is by the time he gets there. And it should take 20 to 30 days, but he's just so exhausted and the conditions are so bad, it takes him 40 days there. So he goes to the mountain of God. God's not spoken to him yet. He's probably not talking to God because he wants to get to God's house before he lets him have it, and he's really going to give it to God. And he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, let me just stop real quick. I tell you this all the time, but I want to tell you again. Anytime you see that all caps Lord, that means Yahweh. That's the name of God. And they just didn't want to say it, so they took it out. But that means Yahweh right there. So the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? Why would God say that? Because he's not where he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be 400 miles away. God never told him to leave. He never told him his assignment was over. He got scared and ran, and then he got angry and decided to confront God. And he thought, the best place to do this is the same place the Ten Commandments were. I'm going to go down there. What are you doing here, Elijah? Why are you here? And Elijah has been practicing this speech for 40 days and 40 nights. Right? You do this in the car on the way to work, you're going to let them have it. And you work it out, and you go through it, and you practice it. Elijah says, now's my chance. God's talking to me. He says, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. How could you let this happen, God? I have been jealous for you, but what have you done for me? They want to kill me. Nobody else is with me. If you've been with us, you know that only 2 things are accurate in this entire thing that he says. The rest is all an exaggeration at best. Elijah has been jealous for the Lord. He has been faithful to God. He has done that. And Some people do want to kill him. We only know for sure about one person that wants to kill him, and that's Jezebel. But this stuff in the middle, Israel has forsaken your covenant. They did do that for sure. But if you remember 2 stories ago, 8 days ago, the nation of Israel came back to God. They said, we're going to decide which God we're going to follow. The one that shows up, the one that moves, that's the one we're going to follow. And they rededicated themselves in the blood of the prophets that they killed, right? They rededicated themselves. They restored the covenant of Israel. They've come back. But Elijah can't see it. They've forsaken your covenant. They've thrown down your altars, which they did. But Elijah, what was the first thing he did during the showdown? He rebuilt the altar. He led out in the revival. He brought this back around. They killed your prophets with the sword. They did do that. They did kill the prophets with the sword. But he says this, I, even I, only am left, which we know is not true. Because if you remember 3 stories ago, Obadiah came to him and said, I've hidden 100 prophets in caves, and they're just waiting on you. They're waiting on you to lead them. They're waiting on you to step up and take the mantle of leadership and go, and they'll go wherever you want. But Elijah doesn't remember that, or he doesn't take them seriously. It's cognitive constriction. It's tunnel vision. It's seeing the world through a straw and not a window. You can't see what God's doing. You can't see anybody else. You think you're alone and that nobody else is working. Nobody else is working as hard as you. Nobody else cares as much as you. So even whenever you say, hey, there's 100 other guys over there that would really like to be on this mountain with you. Well, those guys don't matter. Those guys don't count. I had a person sit in my office. And burnout leads to people being angry with me. I don't know why I'm the target, but they get angry with me in this church. And they're just telling me all the things I've done wrong. And then they say, and besides that, you talk all the time about how this church is a family and we got to reach out to each other. And not a single person has reached out to me. Not a single person has reached out to me. And nobody else in this church is working. Nobody else is carrying the load that I'm carrying. Nobody else cares. And I said, well, let's hang on just a second. Because this person told me they texted you the other day and asked if you were okay. And you didn't respond to them. Is that true? Well, yeah, but that doesn't count. They just felt guilty. That's the only reason they texted me. Well, your deacon said that they called you and talked to you the other day. And you told them everything was fine. Did that happen? Well, yeah, they did, but that's their job. They have to do that. They didn't really care about me. Like, okay, well, if you're not going to listen about all these people that are clearly reaching out to you, you say nobody else is working in this church. Well, what about this person? Well, other than them, nobody else is working. What about that person? Well, other than them, nobody else is working, and nobody else is working as hard as me. And you go through this thing, and it sounds like Elijah. There's nobody else. I'm the only one. Nobody else cares. Nobody else is here. You've let me down. Guys, that is burnout. Because your load gets so heavy, it gets beyond what you're capable of bearing, and you can't see anything but your own pain. And if you think you're the only one, if you think nobody else is there and nobody else cares and nobody else is working, if you can't see what God is doing, even when it's right in front of you, if you're irrationally angry about everything, irrationally upset about everything, and even when good things happen, you dismiss them and find a way to get angry about it, you are in danger. Because these are all things I'm looking for in burnout. When people start to isolate, when they start to hide because they think they're alone, and then they start to tell me how angry they are about something, and that reinforces that isolation, I get real worried about that person. And I'm looking for it in you. But you need to be looking for it in yourself. Elijah said, I, even I only, am the only one left. Bro, that is demonstrably untrue. But nobody can convince him. So God, as he typically does, doesn't really address him at all. You do that with your kids? They're throwing a tantrum and you just kind of ignore it and move on? Verse 11. Oh, yeah, verse 11. Tori was where I was supposed to be, and I didn't think she was yet. And he said, go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. So God says, go out, get out of the cave, stand on the mountain. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. So straight line winds, Oklahoma style, come through. Instead of throwing chicken houses, we're throwing rocks, right? Throwing rocks on the mountain. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, which is why I told him to come out of the cave, because that's not a good place to be during an earthquake. The Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, and this is the most terrifying one to me, because I don't know what was burning on this desert mountain. There's not stuff to burn. But a wildfire comes through. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in the cloak. I'm assuming he went back inside during the fire. I don't know. He wrapped his face in the cloak and went out and stood at the entrance to the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him that said, what are you doing here, Elijah? God just asked the same question he asked before. Are you done with your fit? Are you done throwing a tantrum? What are you doing here? There's a lot of debate amongst scholars about what these things mean, and the good news is God does not explain it, so there's not one settled answer. But what's generally agreed on is that what God was doing was he was showing him Elijah expected God to work through big, dramatic events. But God sent big, dramatic events, and none of those were what he used. Instead, God prefers to work through small, quiet nudges, through individual people trusting him. So God shows up, there's an earthquake, there's a tornado, it's not a tornado, straight line winds, but then there's the fire, and God says, these are what you want, right? You want to have a big mountaintop experience. You want to call down fire from heaven. You want to lay down on the kid and scream. You want to travel 400 miles unnecessarily to have a conversation with me. You want the big dramatic stuff, and you think this is the only way it's going to work. But Elijah, I don't need any of that. In fact, I don't need you to accomplish this. I can accomplish this on my own through small nudges. And he says, what are you doing here? Complaining about me. The issue is not that God is not moving. The issue is that Elijah has taken so much responsibility on himself that he can't see the move of God. And God still doesn't get angry with him. But God's going to do two things for him that are really helpful. One is he's going to shift his perspective. Verse 14. Elijah says, now that this is done, and he says, what are you doing here? Elijah says, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, that for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. In case you didn't think that was a rehearsed speech, he repeats it verbatim. And in verse 15, God says, you clearly have not figured out what I'm trying to teach you here. So let's do this. Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. That's a different king than Ahab, about to be gone. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel-Maholah, I'm struggling today. Abel-Maholah, I should have practiced that. You shall anoint to be prophet in your place. He says, okay, you don't think I'm working. You think the entire world is about you. You think the entire work of God hinges on you. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to get a little bit of glimpse of all the other things I'm doing. I want you to go to Damascus, the capital of Assyria, and I want you to appoint a new king. just so you know that you are not the center of the world. You're going to go to a totally different country, a fourth country in this story, by the way. And I want you to go there and appoint a new king. And then I want you to come back to where you're supposed to be in the first place. This person that you think you're responsible for taking down, this person that you think you're responsible for destroying, for leading back to me, for whatever it is that you think. And I'm going to show you that I've actually already got plans to take care of that. And I want you to anoint Jehu to be the new king. By the way, Jehu is not his son. God's going to end this line without Elijah's help. He said, and then, just to show you that you are not the center of the world and everything does not depend on you, I want you to go find your replacement. And I want you to start training your replacement, because you will end and I will not, and my work will not, and it's going to continue even after you are gone. That's what he says in verse 17. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. And I'm going to do all this work that you think is on you. I'm going to do it, and it's not going to involve you at all. But not only that, when all of this is said and done, there will be 7,000 that you say don't exist, that are just as jealous for me as you are. And the thing is, generally in these counts, they just count men. So it's very likely that there are 7,000 families. And Elijah says they don't exist. So God does two things for him. One is he shifts his perspective. Says, you know what? You need to be restored to your actual size. You think you're this, and that if you don't do it, the world is going to collapse. If you don't step up, the work of God's not going to get done. If you don't do it, nothing is going to work. And we need to restore you. I was told reduce was a little harsh. We need to restore you to your actual size. But there is not a single point where God gets angry, where God berates him. He just says, you think you're this big, but you're actually this big. So why don't you carry the burdens I actually give you and let me handle the rest? And that's the end of the story. After that, Elijah goes on and he anoints Elisha. And I think it's funny. I didn't include it for time's sake, but I think it's funny because Elijah goes to Elisha and he says, hey, you're my replacement. And he just walks up to him in a field and doesn't say anything. He just throws his cloak over him and walks off. Because he's still a little salty about this whole thing. And Elisha says, okay. He understands the meaning of what's happening. And he says, can I go tell my parents bye first? And Elijah says, what do I care? Like, what have I done to you? Do whatever you want. He's a little cranky. God loved him enough to give him what he needed. He needed rest. He needed a shift in perspective. And he needed time away. He needed time with God. And God's response to a child who thinks that they're stronger than they are was not anger, was not frustration, but it was tenderness and help. And I don't know if you see yourself in this story or not. I hope you don't. But if you do, there are some things that you need to take away from this. Number one, the gospel is this: you can't, he can, he will. And that applies not just to your salvation, but your entire life. But if you don't get it for your salvation, you need to understand this, that you are not able to do this on your own. You are not able to be good enough on your own. You're not able to fix what's broken between you and God on your own. And you need him to. And if you don't get that, then you have a whole lot of bigger problem than burnout. He will save you. He will forgive you. He will rescue you once you recognize that you can't do it on your own and he can. And if you don't get that, then no wonder you're having trouble with burnout. If you don't get that, then no wonder you're carrying a load that's bigger than you're meant to carry. Because your entire premise of this thing is wrong. You have to acknowledge that you can't, He can, and He will. Or nothing between you and God is going to be right. The second thing that you need is rest. And rest is not a nap. As much as a nap was in there, maybe naps help. The Western idea of rest is sleep, right? That's why we think it's okay to work 6 or 7 days a week. I got rest. I slept. But God established rest as a part of the week. The Sabbath, the Saturday, is a day of rest, but it's not a day of just napping all day. It's a day of worship. It's a day with family. That rest for God is not sleep, just sleep, but it's disconnecting from work. It's a day where you say the world will not collapse if I take a day off. And almost none of us have that. We're going to talk next week about rest, but let me tell you right now, the thing that you need more than anything is the first thing that God gave Elijah, which is rest. And that may involve sleep, that may start with sleep, but what you need is a day a week that you're disconnected from the control of the universe. The next thing that you need is time with God. You don't just need me to tell you about what God said. You need to sit with the Father in prayer and in study to hear from Him and be strengthened by Him. What did God do on the mountain? He spent time with Elijah. Elijah was in the wrong place. He was in a bad mood, and God sat there with him and waited till he got done ranting and then redirected him. And that's what you need. It's not just time in study. It's not just give me 5 minutes in the Bible. You need to spend some serious time with God, getting yourself realigned. We'll talk about that in 2 weeks. And the last thing that you need is a perspective shift. This is the most painful one. Because what it forces you to do is acknowledge that He is and you're not. That you think the world is spinning on you. You think that if you miss that email, if you miss that text, if you don't stay up, if you don't show up, then the world will fall apart and nothing will function without you. And you're wrong. Let me tell you, it is painful to be reduced to your actual size, but it's a whole lot better to be small enough that you only try to carry what's yours to carry instead of thinking you're so big you can carry the whole thing. And we'll talk about that in 3 weeks. So let me ask you this. Do you see yourself in this story? Are you burnout or on the way to burnout? Because if you are, you need help before you say something, before you do something that you can't undo. You need help. And I will help you to the ability that I can help you and send you to somebody else that can finish the job. You need help. You need rest. You need time with God. You need a perspective shift, but you need help. And what you're going to say, what burnout's going to say to you is nobody else cares, nobody else knows, nobody else understands. It's lying to you. Because I have been through this and I know exactly what it feels like. I've been through it on the burnout side and I've been through it on the people sitting on my couch and crying and yelling at me side. I've been through this and I'm telling you, it's lying to you. There are other people that understand this. If you're not there yet, but you're starting to feel that in yourself, then you need to take on these steps to get yourself corrected before you get all the way there. Maybe you don't need a counselor yet. Maybe you do. Maybe you need to talk to me. Maybe you don't. But what you definitely need is rest, time with God, and a perspective shift. And if you're not there at all, I'm so happy for you. But you will be one day. And if you will start these things now, then you will prevent a very painful experience that's coming for you down the road. Now, I know the world revolves around you and you can handle everything and there's no problems. But what if you just admitted for once that there is and it doesn't? What if you use this church for what it's for? To give you people that can help you and walk alongside you and be with you? What if you decided that instead of continuing to hold the world up by yourself, you decided to set it down and trust God? How much better would your life be? Wouldn't you like to enjoy the things of God? Enjoy the climax moments? Enjoy all these points that come along in your life that you would really love to experience? Wouldn't you like to experience those and enjoy those and rest in those and celebrate those instead of immediately moving from one problem to the next problem to the next problem? Because that is an option for you if you'll let it be. So what will you do? Stand with me, please. Our Heavenly Father, we come before you, and I'm so grateful for this story of Elijah. And the more that I read this story, the more I learn about him, the more I see myself in him. And I'm so grateful that your response was not anger, it was not frustration, but it's the same response that I would have if my kid tried to carry something that was 3 times their weight. And I ask, Lord, that for those in the room who are suffering and don't know you, that they would recognize that they don't have the ability to do this on their own and they need you to handle it for them. That they would call out to you for forgiveness and rescue and that they might be saved today. For those that are burnt out and they see themselves in this story, Lord, I ask that they would be humble enough to take the steps of recovery and seek out help. For those that are on their way, that they would get ahead of this. And for those that are not there, that they would take this seriously enough to start these things now. But I'm grateful, Lord, that you are full of grace and forgiveness. Because I've sat in the room with people that have burnt out. And even when burnout comes, even when they say the dumb thing to you, to me, to the people around them, even when they break things that can't be fixed, there is still grace. There's still opportunity, and you can still restore. I thank you, Lord. And it's in Jesus' name I pray.